There are moments that function as hinges, swinging the door of your life from a familiar room into a hallway you never knew existed. They are rarely loud. They don't announce themselves with thunder or fanfare, but arrive in the quiet half-light of a Tuesday night, disguised as something ordinary, something forgettable. For me, that moment was the specific quality of silence in Julian's bedroom, a silence punctuated only by the whisper of his breath against the back of my neck. He was asleep, or at least performing a convincing imitation of it, and his arm was draped over my waist with a possessive weight that felt both like an anchor and a cage. My own body was a study in stillness, a rigid line of feigned slumber, because to move, to even shift my weight, felt like it would shatter the fragile architecture of the scene. I had spent years, nearly a decade, constructing a fortress around the part of my heart that belonged to him. It was a well-defended place, built of plausible deniability and the sturdy mortar of our established dynamic. I was Leo, his younger brother's best friend. I was the quiet one, the photographer who saw the world in frames and shadows, the permanent, reliable fixture in the background of his family's life. He was Julian, a celestial body whose gravity I had felt since I was 15 years old. He was the sun around which his brother, Sam, and by extension, I, had always orbited. To even imagine a moment like this, tangled together in the starless dark of his room, the scent of his laundry detergent and the faint, clean smell of his skin filling my senses, was a fantasy so dangerous I had locked it away in the deepest vault of my mind. Yet here it was, real, terrifyingly, beautifully real. The bedroom door was ajar. It was always ajar. That single detail had become the focal point of my obsessive analysis over the past few months. It was a sliver of hallway light, a declaration of ambiguity. An open door meant nothing was truly decided. It was an escape route. It meant he could have left, or I could have. It meant this was temporary, an accident, a product of exhaustion and loneliness that would be erased by the morning light. A closed door would have been a statement, a commitment to the space we were sharing. An open door was a loophole. And Julian, I was learning, was a man who lived in the safety of loopholes. His arm tightened around me in his sleep, pulling me closer until my back was flush against his chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cathedral quiet. I didn't dare breathe. I just lay there, suspended in that hinge moment, caught between the room I had always known and the hallway that promised everything, or nothing at all. And I wondered, not for the first time, how we had even gotten here. It began, as most things in my life did, with Sam. We had collided in a ninth-grade biology class, a partnership forged over the mutual terror of dissecting a frog. Sam was loud where I was quiet, chaotic where I was contained. He was a supernova of energy, and I, a satellite caught in his orbit. He filled the silences I created, pulling me into his world with an easy, unquestioning acceptance that I desperately needed. His family's house became my second home, a sprawling, comfortable place filled with the scent of whatever his mom was baking and the constant, low-level hum of a happy, lived-in space. It was there, in the autumn of my 15th year, that I first truly saw Julian. I had seen him before, of course, brief glimpses of the older brother, a figure who was always just leaving a room as I was entering it. He was 4 years older, a senior in high school, and existed in a completely different stratosphere. He was a myth, a legend in the household, the responsible one, the brilliant one, the one with a car and a girlfriend and a future that was already taking shape. That day, however, the myth became flesh. I was in the kitchen with Sam, attempting to decipher our calculus homework, when Julian walked in. He'd just come back from soccer practice, and his hair was damp, clinging to his forehead. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt that clung to the lean muscles of his chest and shoulders. He didn't say anything at first, just moved to the refrigerator with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. He pulled out a carton of orange juice and drank straight from it, his throat working. I remember the way the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching the line of his jaw and illuminating the tiny droplets of sweat on his temples. It was like watching a photograph develop before my eyes, a moment of perfect composition. He finally looked over at us, his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue-gray, landing on me for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A slow smile spread across his face, not the wide, boisterous grin Sam so often wore, but something smaller, quieter, more knowing. "Don't let him copy your answers, Leo," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "He'll never learn anything." Then he ruffled Sam's hair, grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter, and was gone, leaving a strange, vibrating silence in his wake. My heart was doing something frantic and unfamiliar in my chest. It felt as though a switch had been flipped inside me, illuminating a room I hadn't known was there. From that day forward, my awareness of Julian became a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my life. I learned to track his presence in the house by the sound of his footsteps on the floor above, the distant thump of music from his bedroom, the scent of his cologne hanging faintly in the hallway. My friendship with Sam was the passport that allowed me access to this world, and I guarded it fiercely. I spent countless hours at their house, becoming a piece of the furniture, a part of the family in a way that felt both wonderful and deeply precarious. I was the observer, the archivist of their lives, and my camera became my shield. I took pictures of everything. Sam midlaugh, their dog sleeping in a patch of sun, their mother's hands kneading dough. And sometimes, when I was brave, I would take pictures of Julian. He was a difficult subject, always in motion, or else so still he seemed to blend into the background. I have a photograph from that time, a grainy black and white shot I took on the sly. He's sitting on the back porch steps, a textbook open on his lap, but he's not reading. He's staring out at the setting sun, his profile etched in gold, a thoughtful, almost melancholy expression on his face. He looked, in that moment, profoundly lonely. It was the first time I saw a crack in the perfect facade, a hint of the restless, searching soul that lived beneath the surface of the confident older brother. That photograph became a secret totem, a confirmation of the complex, intriguing person I was beginning to see. It was the first piece of evidence in a case I was building inside my own mind, the case for why this impossible, hopeless affection felt so real. Over the next few years, as he went off to college to study architecture and I navigated the treacherous landscape of high school, our interactions were sporadic. He would come home for holidays and summer breaks, and each time, he seemed more and more like a finished person. He carried himself with a new, adult confidence. He spoke about things like structural integrity and urban planning with a passion that was captivating. I would sit at the family dinner table, silent, and just listen, absorbing the details of his life like a plant turning toward the sun. He was always kind to me, in a slightly distant, older brotherly way. He'd ask about my photography, his questions always more insightful than anyone else's. He'd look at my prints, his gaze lingering, his head tilted in concentration. "You have a good eye, Leo," he told me once, tapping a photo I'd taken of a decaying pier. "You see the beauty in things that are falling apart." I felt seen by him in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as if he could look right through the quiet, shy exterior and see the roiling mess of emotion I kept so carefully hidden. Our dynamic was one of quiet, mutual respect, built on the foundation of our shared love for Sam. Julian appreciated that I was a steadying presence in his brother's whirlwind life. I appreciated that he existed. It was a simple, unspoken transaction. He would occasionally offer me a ride home if it was late, and those 10-minute car rides were a form of exquisite torture. The space was so small, so intimate, filled with the scent of his car and the low thrum of whatever indie band he was listening to. I would sit in the passenger seat, my hands clenched in my lap, my entire being focused on not letting my knee accidentally brush against his. I would answer his questions in monosyllables, terrified that if I opened my mouth too wide, my secret would come spilling out. He must have thought I was impossibly shy, or perhaps just rude, but he never pushed. He seemed to understand my need for silence, or at least he tolerated it. We would drive through the sleeping suburban streets, wrapped in a comfortable quiet that felt more intimate than any conversation. The summer before I left for college, something shifted. Julian had graduated and was working his first grueling job at a prestigious architecture firm in the city. Sam was away at a soccer camp for 2 weeks, leaving a strange vacuum in the house. I was there, helping his mom clear out the garage, when Julian came home, looking utterly drained. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He saw me, and for a moment, he just stood there, his briefcase hanging from his hand like a dead weight. Then he gave me a tired, crooked smile. "Hey, Leo. Didn't know you were here," his mom fussed over him, trying to press a plate of food into his hands. But he just shook his head and made his way to the back porch. A little while later, I found him there, sitting on the same steps as in my photograph, nursing a beer and staring out at the twilight. I almost retreated, not wanting to intrude on his private moment of exhaustion. But something compelled me to stay. I walked over and sat down a few feet away from him, leaving a careful, respectful distance between us. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the drone of the cicadas. The air was thick and humid, smelling of cut grass and impending rain. I didn't know what to say. All the words I had felt inadequate. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. "They're trying to kill me at this job." I glanced over at him. His face, in the dimming light, looked vulnerable. "It's a big project," he continued, not really looking at me, but at the darkening tree line. "A museum. Everyone wants to make their mark. Everyone's fighting for their ideas to be the one that gets chosen. It's the lot." He took a long swallow of his beer. "It feels like trying to build something beautiful in the middle of a war zone." "But you're good at that," I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. He turned to look at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "At what?" he asked. "Seeing the structure in the chaos." I clarified, feeling my cheeks grow warm. "Finding the right lines. You do it in your drawings. You do it when you talk about buildings. You find the order." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on my face. It felt like he was reevaluating me, seeing me not just as Sam's friend, but as a person with his own thoughts, his own observations. A slow smile touched his lips, the same quiet, knowing one from all those years ago in the kitchen. "You really pay attention, don't you?" he said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a discovery. In that moment, the distance between us seemed to shrink. I was no longer just a kid. I was someone who saw him. And for the first time, I had the distinct feeling that he was finally, truly, seeing me back. That night laid a new stone in the foundation of our relationship, a stone of quiet understanding that had nothing to do with Sam. It was the beginning of something that was just ours. The real shift, the seismic event that cracked the foundations of our careful, platonic friendship, happened 2 years ago. I was living in a small, one-bedroom apartment in the city, making a living as a freelance photographer, shooting weddings and portraits to pay the bills, while working on my own art in the quiet hours. Julian was a rising star at his firm, but the pressure was immense. He was in a long-term relationship with a woman named Claire, a lawyer who was as ambitious and driven as he was. From the outside, they were the perfect couple. They looked good in photographs, their lives a curated collection of successful moments. But whenever I saw them together at family gatherings, I noticed a subtle tension, a dissonance between the image and the reality. Their conversations seemed to be negotiations, their touches performative. I saw the way Julian's smile never quite reached his eyes when she was talking, the way his shoulders were always just a little too tight. The catalyst was a quiet implosion. It wasn't one dramatic event, but a series of small, grinding failures. Claire left him. It was a clean, surgical break, as she called it, a mutual decision to end something that had been running on fumes for years. But for Julian, it was still a demolition. He had spent 5 years building a life with her, and in the space of a single conversation, the structure was gone, leaving nothing but an empty lot. He didn't tell anyone at first, not even his parents or Sam. He just kept going to work, pouring all his energy into a competition for a new public library design, a project he was desperate to win. He was working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a stubborn refusal to fall apart. But you can only defy gravity for so long. One Tuesday night, close to midnight, my buzzer rang. The sound was so jarring in the silence of my apartment that I nearly dropped the photo I was editing. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart gave a nervous lurch as I went to the intercom. "Hello?" I asked. A pause, then a voice, distorted by static but unmistakably his. "Leo? It's Julian. Can I come up?" My mind raced. Why was he here? Was something wrong with Sam? With his parents? I buzzed him in without another word, my stomach twisting into a tight knot of anxiety. When I opened the door, he was just standing there in the hallway, looking completely undone. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and his hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it over and over. He was holding a cardboard tube, the kind used for architectural drawings, like it was a shield. "Julian? What's wrong? Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice tight with worry. He just stared at me for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes looking hollowed out, lost. "I didn't win," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The library. They went with another design." He gestured vaguely with the cardboard tube. "All that work. For nothing." He looked past me, into my apartment, as if searching for something. "And Claire, we broke up. A few weeks ago." The two confessions hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. He looked so utterly defeated, so completely adrift, that all my carefully constructed walls crumbled. He was no longer Julian, the brilliant architect, the confident older brother. He was just a man who had lost his footing and was about to fall. "I didn't know where else to go," he whispered, and the admission was so raw, so vulnerable, it broke my heart. I couldn't be in my apartment. It's too quiet. And too loud. At the same time. I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," I said softly. He walked past me into the living room, moving like an old man. He sank onto my couch, the cardboard tube resting against his knees, and just sat there, staring at the blank wall opposite him. I didn't know what to do. The situation was so far outside the bounds of our usual interactions. All my instincts screamed at me to keep a safe distance, to protect myself. But looking at him, so broken and lost in the warm, quiet space of my home, I couldn't. I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, the way my mom used to for me when I was sick or sad. I brought it to him, placing it on the coaster on my coffee table. He didn't seem to notice. I sat down in the armchair across from him, creating a buffer of space, and waited. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. The only sounds were the hum of my refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. I just watched him, my heart aching with a helpless, protective urge. He looked like a building after a storm, still standing, but with all the windows blown out, the rain pouring in. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and burying his face in his hands. His shoulders started to shake, and a choked, guttural sound escaped him. It wasn't loud, but it was the sound of complete and utter collapse. It was the sound of a man who had been holding everything together for so long that he had forgotten how to let go. And in that moment, all the years of unspoken affection, all the carefully guarded feelings, transformed into a simple, overwhelming need to offer comfort. I moved from the armchair to the couch, sitting beside him. I didn't say anything. I just rested my hand on his back, between his shoulder blades. At my touch, a fresh wave of sobs racked his body. He didn't pull away. He leaned into my touch, just slightly, a silent admission of need. I just sat there, my hand on his back, rubbing small, slow circles, offering the only thing I had, my quiet, steady presence. This was the shift. This was the moment the earth moved beneath our feet, creating a fault line in the landscape of our friendship. He had come to me, not to Sam, not to his parents, but to me. In his moment of total collapse, he had sought out my quiet room, my silent company. He had knocked on a door he had never knocked on before, and I had let him in. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. That night began the ritual. He fell asleep on my couch, his head lolling to one side, his face etched with exhaustion even in slumber. I found a blanket in my linen closet, the soft, worn quilt my grandmother had made, and gently draped it over him. I stood there for a long time, just looking at him, at the way his long lashes rested on his cheeks, the slight frown that lingered on his brow. The urge to reach out and smooth the worry from his forehead was so strong it made my fingers ache. But I resisted. I turned off the main lights, leaving only a small lamp on in the corner, and retreated to my bedroom, leaving the door ajar. I lay in my own bed, wide awake, listening to the sound of his breathing from the other room. It was an invisible thread connecting us, a fragile line drawn between his world and mine. In the morning, he was gone. He'd folded the blanket neatly and left it on the arm of the couch. There was a text on my phone, sent at 6 a.m. Thanks for last night, Leo. I owe you one. It was casual, dismissive, an attempt to re-establish the old boundaries. But it was too late. A new door had been opened, and even if he was trying to pretend it hadn't, we had both stepped through it. A few nights later, he was back. This time, there was a pretext. He brought over a bottle of wine, a peace offering, and a new set of drawings for a smaller project he was working on. He said he wanted a fresh pair of eyes on them, and he'd always valued my artistic sensibilities. It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. We sat on the floor of my living room, the blueprints spread out between us, and for a while, we actually talked about them. I pointed out things I liked, the flow of the space, the way he used light. He listened intently, his gaze focused, the architect back in control. But as the night wore on and the wine bottle emptied, the facade began to crumble again. The conversation drifted away from work into the quiet, empty spaces of his life. He talked about the suffocating silence of his apartment, the ghost of Claire's presence in every room. He didn't cry this time. He was just empty and tired, so incredibly tired. I just can't seem to sleep anymore, he confessed, staring into his empty wine glass. I lie there for hours, and my brain just won't shut off. It just replays every mistake, every wrong turn. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. It was quiet here the other night. I slept. For the first time in weeks, I actually slept. The unspoken question hung in the air between us. He wanted to stay. He wanted the peace he had found on my couch. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to say no, to protect myself, to send him home and rebuild my fortress. But I couldn't. Looking at his exhausted, hopeful face, I just couldn't. The couch is all yours, I said, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. He gave me a small, grateful smile that was so full of relief it almost broke me. Thanks, Leo, he whispered. You're a lifesaver. So he slept on my couch again, and again the next week. It became our new routine, our unspoken arrangement. He would show up late, sometimes with a reason, sometimes with none at all. We would share a beer or a cup of tea, talk for a little while, or just sit in a comfortable silence, watching some old movie on television that neither of us was really paying attention to. And then, inevitably, his eyes would grow heavy, his posture would slump with weariness, and I would offer him the couch. I would fetch the blanket, and he would murmur his thanks, and I would retreat to my room, leaving the lamp on and the door ajar. It was a strange, suspended reality. During the day, we were just Leo and Julian. We'd exchange normal texts. We'd see each other at his parents' house and act as if nothing was different. But at night, in the privacy of my small apartment, we were something else entirely. We were two lonely people finding a strange, fragile comfort in each other's proximity. I lived for those nights. They were a form of exquisite torture. My apartment, once my sanctuary, became a stage. Every object was a prop, every word a line in a play whose ending I couldn't predict. I became a scholar of his exhaustion, an expert in the subtle language of his weariness. I could tell by the slump of his shoulders how bad his day had been. I could hear the unspoken anxieties in the silences between his words. I was so hyper-aware of him, of his physical presence in my space, that it was a constant, low-level hum in my veins. The scent of him lingered on my couch long after he was gone. I would find a stray sock he'd left behind, or the coffee mug he'd used still sitting by the sink, and my heart would give a painful lurch. I was drowning in the evidence of him. The ritual evolved. After a few weeks of him sleeping on the couch, my back started to ache in sympathy. "This is ridiculous, Julian," I said one night, as he was starting to nod off during a documentary about deep-sea life. "My couch is not meant for a person your size. You're going to permanently damage your spine." He blinked at me, his eyes bleary. "It's fine, Leo. I'm okay." "No," I insisted, my voice firmer than I intended. "Take my bed. I'll take the couch. It's fine. I can sleep anywhere." He started to protest, a reflexive politeness, but he was too tired to put up a real fight. The idea of a real mattress was too tempting. So he relented. I changed the sheets for him, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed the clean, cool cotton over the mattress. The thought of him sleeping in my bed, in my most private space, was almost too much to bear. I tried to take the couch, but he stopped me. He was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, a dark silhouette against the light from the living room. "Leo, wait," he said. I turned. "What?" I can't," he said, his voice low. "I can't just kick you out of your own bed. It feels wrong." "It's fine, Julian. I really don't mind." "No," he said again. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me. "The bed's big enough. For both of us. If you don't mind." The proposition hung in the air, electrifying the space between us. It was a logical suggestion, a practical solution, and yet it felt like the most radical, world-altering proposal I had ever heard. My entire body went cold, then hot. My mind was a maelstrom of panic and hope. This was it. This was the point of no return. Saying no would be the sensible thing to do. It would be the self-protective thing to do. It would be the thing that kept my heart from being shattered into a million pieces when this strange interlude inevitably came to an end. "Okay," I heard myself say. The word was a whisper, a surrender. He nodded, a quick, almost nervous gesture, and retreated into the bedroom. I stood in the living room for a few minutes, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was terrified. I was elated. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into the air. I walked into the bedroom. He was already under the covers, lying on the far side of the bed, his back to me. He had left a vast, empty expanse of mattress for me. I moved around the bed and slid under the covers, my movements stiff and awkward. I lay on my back, as far over on my side as I could get, my body a rigid plank of tension. The silence was deafening. It was so much more charged, so much more intimate, than the silence when he was on the couch. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small distance between us. I could hear every breath he took. "Thanks, Leo," he murmured, his voice muffled by the pillow. Good night, Julian," I whispered back to the ceiling. I lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing slowly deepen and even out into the rhythm of sleep. I was acutely aware of every inch of him. I was building a new map of the world, and he was the entire continent. Eventually, in the deep, quiet hours of the morning, something happened. In his sleep, he rolled over, his body turning towards mine. His arm, in a moment of unconscious seeking, flopped over and landed on my stomach. I froze, my entire body locking up. My breath caught in my chest. He didn't wake up. He just sighed, a soft, contented sound, and snuggled closer, his forehead coming to rest against my shoulder. His hand, which had landed on my stomach, now lay loosely against my side. And I just lay there, pinned by the weight of his arm and the impossible reality of the situation. I was in my bed, with Julian, and he was holding me. I felt like I might spontaneously combust. The warmth of his body seeped into mine, a slow, creeping heat that thawed parts of me I didn't even know were frozen. It was the most terrifying and the most wonderful feeling I had ever experienced. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just lay there, a willing captive, memorizing the feeling of his weight against me, the sound of his breath in my ear, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window. This became the new ritual, the third and most dangerous evolution. He no longer bothered with the couch. He would arrive, we would talk, and then we would go to bed. The pretense of it being a practical solution was quickly forgotten. It was just what we did. We would lie on our separate sides of the bed, a careful demilitarized zone between us. And in the dark, in the quiet, in the vulnerability of sleep, he would cross it. He would always turn toward me, always find me. Sometimes it was just his arm thrown over my waist. Sometimes he would press his entire body against my back, his chin resting on my shoulder, his legs tangling with mine. He was like a plant seeking the sun, unconsciously turning toward a source of warmth and life. I became his anchor in the dark. My life bifurcated into two distinct realities. There was the daytime Leo, the one who went about his business, who talked to Sam on the phone and pretended everything was normal, who edited his photos and answered his emails. And then there was the nighttime Leo, the secret keeper, the human sanctuary. I was living in a state of perpetual, high-alert yearning. My body was a field of live wires, constantly humming with the memory of his touch and the anticipation of it. I studied him like he was a language I was desperate to learn. I watched the way his brow would furrow when he was concentrating on a drawing, the way he would chew on his lower lip. I watched the way his eyes would go distant when he was lost in thought. I was a photographer, and he was my most compelling subject. I was capturing millions of tiny, intimate moments and developing them in the darkroom of my mind. I was drowning in ambiguity. Was this real? Did it mean anything? Or was I just a convenient, warm body? Was I just a substitute for the comfort he had lost? The plausible deniability of it all was maddening. He was asleep when he held me. He was unconscious. He could claim no knowledge of it, no responsibility for the hope he was building inside me, brick by fragile brick. I would lie awake, night after night, with his arm around me, his breath on my neck, and I would have these furious, silent arguments with myself. One part of me, the hopeful, romantic part, was convinced that his unconscious mind was revealing a truth his conscious mind was too afraid to face. The other part, the cynical, self-protective part, was sure I was just a human teddy bear, a temporary fix for his loneliness that he would discard as soon as he was back on his feet. The tension was becoming unbearable. I felt like a photograph being overexposed, the image burning away into pure, white light. Something had to give. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday night in April. The sound of the rain against my window pane was a constant, soothing hiss. Julian had been quiet all evening, more so than usual. He'd brought takeout, and we'd eaten mostly in silence. There was a new tension in him, a coiled spring quality that set my nerves on edge. He seemed distracted, his gaze constantly drifting, his answers to my questions monosyllabic. When we finally retreated to the bedroom, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken things. We got into bed, assuming our usual positions on opposite sides of the mattress. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. I waited for the familiar shift, for him to roll over and find me in his sleep. But he didn't. He just lay there, on his side, his back to me, perfectly still. The minutes stretched on, thick and heavy. The silence in the room was different tonight. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud. It was the silence of two people pretending to be asleep, two people hyper-aware of each other's presence. I could feel his wakefulness like a physical force. I knew he was staring at the wall, his mind racing, just as mine was. The ritual was broken. The unspoken contract was violated. And the absence of his touch was more potent, more painful, than its presence had ever been. It was a confirmation of my deepest fears. It was over. He had healed enough. He didn't need me anymore. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I felt a cold, desolate grief wash over me. I must have made some sound, a small, involuntary sigh or a hitch in my breath, because he spoke, his voice cutting through the darkness, low and rough. Leo. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. Are you awake? He asked, his voice softer this time. I remained silent, hoping he would think I was asleep, that he would just let it go. But he didn't. I heard the rustle of the covers as he shifted, turning over to face me. I kept my eyes closed, my body rigid. I could feel his gaze on me in the dark. Leo, I know you're awake, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Please, the plea in his voice was my undoing. I slowly, reluctantly, turned my head to look at him. In the faint, gray light filtering in from the street lamp outside my window, I could just make out his silhouette, the dark shape of his head on the pillow. "I'm awake," I whispered, my voice hoarse. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of all the things he wasn't saying. The air between us was electric, vibrating with months of unspoken tension, of unanswered questions. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For what?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "For all of this," he said, a vague gesture that encompassed the bed, the room, the past few months. "For showing up at your door? For taking over your apartment? For being a mess? You don't have to apologize for that," I said, and I meant it. "Yes, I do," he insisted. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. His face was a landscape of shadows, his expression unreadable. "It wasn't fair to you. I've been using you, Leo." The words were a punch to the gut. Using you. It was my worst fear, spoken aloud. I felt a hot, bitter wave of shame and anger rise in my throat. I started to turn away, to put my back to him, to shield myself from the final, killing blow. But he reached out, his hand closing gently around my arm, stopping me. His touch was electric. It was the first time he had ever touched me with conscious intent. "No, wait," he said, his voice urgent. "That's not what I mean. Not like that. I just mean, I needed something. I was drowning, and you were the only solid ground I could find. And I just held on, without asking, without thinking about what it was doing to you." He paused, his thumb stroking the bare skin of my arm, a small, mesmerizing movement. "You have to know," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, so low I had to strain to hear him over the rain. "You have to know that I'm not asleep." My breath caught. "What? When we're here," he struggled for the words. "And I hold you. I'm not asleep. Not always. Not anymore." The confession landed in the quiet room with the force of a detonation. It shattered everything. All the ambiguity, all the plausible deniability, all my carefully constructed theories, they all turned to dust. He knew. He had known. He had been a willing, conscious participant in this strange, silent intimacy. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process the implications of his words. He was still looking down at me, his expression a mixture of fear and a desperate, raw vulnerability I had never seen in him before. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, the word a ragged whisper. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was a coward," he said simply, his honesty brutal. "Because I didn't know what it meant. And I was terrified of what it meant. I was terrified of this." He gestured between us, at the small space separating our bodies. "And I was terrified of ruining the one good, quiet thing I had left in my life. He let out a shaky breath. "But I can't. I can't keep pretending anymore. It's not fair to you. It's not honest." He fell silent, his thumb still making slow, gentle circles on my arm. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of his confession. He had just handed me the truth, a fragile, terrifying thing. And now he was waiting for me to either accept it or shatter it completely. He took a slow, deliberate breath, as if steeling himself. His gaze never left my face, and in the dim light, I could see the profound, terrifying hope in his eyes. It was the same look I imagined I'd had on my own face for months. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was more than just fear, it was a plea. "Would it be okay?" He trailed off, his courage failing him for a split second. He swallowed, and tried again. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was so soft, so tentative, it was almost carried away by the sound of the rain. It was the most vulnerable, most honest question anyone had ever asked me. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a presumption. It was a request for permission. It was a confession of desire, wrapped in a blanket of respect for my boundaries, for my feelings. In that one question, he was giving me all the power. He was laying himself bare, offering me his heart, and giving me the choice to either accept it or turn it away. My own heart, which had been pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm, suddenly went still and quiet. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the months of torturous uncertainty, they all just evaporated. and in their place was a simple, profound clarity. I didn't trust my voice. I was afraid that if I tried to speak, the only sound that would come out would be a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. So I just nodded. A small, jerky movement. But it was enough. It was everything. A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable I could almost feel it. He lowered his head slowly, giving me every possible chance to change my mind, to pull away. But I didn't move. I met him halfway, lifting my head from the pillow, closing the final, infinitesimal distance between us. His lips met mine, and it was nothing like I had ever imagined. It wasn't a spark or a firework. It was like coming home. It was soft and hesitant and unbelievably gentle. It was a question and an answer and a promise, all at once. It tasted of rain and salt and years of unspoken longing. It was just a simple press of lips, no more, but it held the weight of 1,000 secret nights, of 1,000,000 unsaid words. It was a beginning. It was an end. It was everything. When he pulled back, his forehead came to rest against mine. We just stayed there, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The storm outside and the storm inside me had finally, blessedly, broken. The morning after was a study in quiet terror. The kiss had changed the composition of the air, the very molecular structure of the space between us. When I woke, the bed beside me was empty. The warmth of his body was a ghost on the sheets. I lay there for a long moment, my heart sinking. A cold dread, familiar and unwelcome, began to creep back in. Had I dreamed it? Had the confession and the kiss been a hallucination brought on by longing and the sound of the rain? I got out of bed and walked into the living room. He was there, fully dressed, standing by the window, staring down at the wet street below. He was holding his coffee mug, but he wasn't drinking from it. His shoulders were rigid, his posture defensive. He heard me enter and turned, and the look on his face confirmed my fear. He was panicked. His eyes were wide and haunted, and he wouldn't quite meet my gaze. "Hey," he said, his voice strained. "I made coffee." "Julian," I started, but he cut me off. "I should go," he said quickly, placing the mug on the counter. "I have an early meeting." A lot to do. He was already moving toward the door, grabbing his jacket, his keys. He was fleeing. The architect was demolishing the structure we had just begun to build. "Julian." "Wait," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, his back to me. "Don't do this," I pleaded, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't run." He was silent for a long moment. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the war he was fighting with himself. "I can't, Leo," he finally said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "I can't do this," and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the sudden, crushing silence of the apartment. I stood there, staring at the closed door, for a long, long time. The silence he left behind was a physical presence, a suffocating weight. The joy and relief of the night before curdled into a bitter, aching despair. He had panicked. He had regretted it. The kiss, the confession, it had all been a mistake. A moment of weakness. I was back to being the fool, the one who had misinterpreted everything, who had dared to hope for something that was never really there. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I replayed the entire night over and over in my head, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for the moment I had gotten it so wrong. The silence from him was absolute. He didn't call. He didn't text. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. The pain of his absence was a dull, constant ache in my chest. It was worse than the years of silent longing, because now I knew what I was missing. I had been given a glimpse of a different world, a different life, and then the door had been slammed shut in my face. The anger came later. It started as a slow burn and built into a quiet, simmering rage. It wasn't fair. He had been the one to initiate everything. He had been the one to show up at my door, to sleep in my bed, to hold me in the dark. He had been the one to ask if he could kiss me. He had opened that door, inch by painful inch, and then, when I had finally found the courage to step through it with him, he had bolted. I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't let our story be a half-finished sentence, a question left hanging in the air. I deserved an explanation. I deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. After 3 days of agonizing silence, I made a decision. I couldn't live in the ambiguity anymore. I put on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and walked out of my apartment. I was going to his. I was going to get an answer. The confrontation was quieter than I had imagined. There was no yelling, no dramatic accusations. There was just a raw, painful honesty. I found him in his studio, a large, airy room in his otherwise immaculate apartment that was a complete disaster. Blueprints were scattered everywhere, models were in various states of completion, and empty coffee cups littered every available surface. He was standing over a large table, staring down at a set of drawings, but he wasn't seeing them. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked haunted. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just looked up, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. "Leo," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You can't do that," I said, my own voice quiet but firm, shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You can't just disappear. Not after that." He flinched, as if I had struck him. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I'm a coward. I don't care if you're a coward, Julian," I said, taking a step closer. "I just need you to be an honest one. You asked me for honesty in the dark, and now I'm asking you for it in the light. What was that? What is this?" I gestured between us. "Tell me it was a mistake. Tell me you regret it. Tell me you were just lonely and I was just convenient. I don't care what it is. Just tell me the truth so I can move on." He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes were swimming with a miserable, conflicted pain. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "And I don't regret it. God, Leo, I don't regret it at all. That's what scares me." He sank down onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know what I'm doing," he mumbled into his palms. "For my entire life, I've had a plan. I build things. I make blueprints. I know the structure, the foundation, the end goal. But this, with you, there's no blueprint. I've never felt this way before. About anyone." He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. It was the second time I had seen him cry, and it was just as devastating as the first. "It's you, Leo," he whispered. "It's always been you, hiding in plain sight, and I was too stupid and too blind to see it. And now I see it, and it terrifies me. It terrifies me because you're Sam's best friend. It terrifies me because you're the best person I know, and I'm a mess, and I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to break the one good thing I have." His confession, his fear, it washed away all my anger, leaving only a profound, aching tenderness. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself, from the depth of his own feelings. He was trying to protect me, in his own clumsy, misguided way. I walked over to him and gently pulled his hands away from his face. I knelt in front of him, so we were at eye level. "You're not going to ruin me, Julian," I said softly. "The only thing that will ruin me is this silence. This distance." I took his hand, his large, warm hand that had held me so many nights, and laced my fingers through his. "You don't need a blueprint," I said. "We can just lay one brick at a time, together, and see what we build." He stared at me, his breath catching. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He squeezed my hand, a desperate, grateful pressure. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, Leo. One brick at a time." And so we began. The days that followed were tentative and new, like the first thaw of a long winter. The grand, terrifying chasm of ambiguity that had separated us was gone, replaced by the quiet, sturdy ground of intention. We talked. For hours. We sat in my apartment, or his, and we unspooled years of unspoken thoughts, of hidden feelings. He told me about the suffocating loneliness he'd felt even when he was with Claire, the constant feeling of playing a part that didn't fit. He confessed that my quiet presence had always been a source of comfort for him, a still point in his chaotic world, long before he understood why. I, in turn, confessed the depth and breadth of my own long-held affection, the secret I had guarded since I was a teenager. Laying it all bare was terrifying, but it was also a profound relief. It was like airing out a room that had been sealed shut for a decade. The ritual of the nights continued, but it was transformed. There was no more pretense. There was no more sleeping on opposite sides of the bed, waiting for an unconscious gravity to pull us together. Now, we came together by choice. He would wrap his arms around me, pulling me close, and I would lean back into the solid warmth of his chest, and we would just lie there, breathing in unison. The silence was no longer fraught with tension. It was filled with a deep, abiding peace. It was the silence of two people who had finally found their way home. We were learning a new language, a language of gentle touches and soft kisses, of shared mornings and quiet evenings. It was a language spoken not in grand declarations, but in small, domestic acts of love. It was in the way he would bring me a cup of coffee in the morning, just the way I liked it. It was in the way I would sit quietly in his studio while he worked, just being near him. One evening, about a week after our confession, we were lying in my bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. He was looking at a book of my photographs, his fingers tracing the edges of the prints with a gentle reverence. He stopped on the old, grainy photo I had taken of him on his parents' back porch all those years ago. He was quiet for a long time, just staring at the image of his younger, lonelier self. "You saw me, didn't you?" he said softly, not looking up. "Even back then. You saw the parts one was trying to hide. I've always seen you, Julian," I whispered. He finally looked at me, his gray-blue eyes clear and full of an emotion that made my heart ache with its intensity. He leaned over and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that was full of gratitude and wonder. Later that night, as we were settling into sleep, he did something new. He got out of bed, walked over to the bedroom door, and pushed it gently shut. The soft click of the latch echoed in the quiet room. It was such a small sound, but it felt as monumental as a cathedral bell. The door was no longer ajar. The loophole was closed. There was no escape route, because we no longer needed one. He came back to bed and gathered me into his arms, holding me tighter than ever before. He buried his face in my hair and let out a long, contented sigh. "It's better this way," he murmured against my scalp. "No drafts." I smiled into the darkness, a real, genuine smile of pure happiness. He wasn't just talking about the temperature of the room. He was talking about us. We were enclosed, safe, in a space we had built together, a space with no room for ambiguity. Life didn't magically become simple. There were still complexities to navigate, conversations to be had, particularly with Sam. But for the first time, we were facing them together as a unit. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was overshadowed by the profound, grounding certainty of what we had found in each other. We were building our new structure, brick by careful brick, not from a pre-drawn blueprint, but from a place of honest, vulnerable love. We were discovering the design as we went, finding the right lines, learning the unique architecture of each other's hearts. I think back now to that first night, to the terror and hope I felt lying beside him in the dark, my world balanced on the hinge of a single moment. It's strange to think that the quietest moments are often the most revolutionary. They are the moments that redraw the maps of our lives. The greatest structures, I've learned, are not always built of steel and glass, designed for the whole world to see. Sometimes, they are built in the quiet of a small apartment, with a borrowed blanket and a whispered confession. They are built of shared silence and patient understanding, of the courage to admit you're lost, and the grace to be the one who offers a safe harbor. They are built by closing a door on the rest of the world, not to hide, but to create a new one, just for two. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned how to create together, we were building something that felt like it could last forever.